Picture this for a second. You're standing on the edge of the freezing, turbulent waters of the North Sea. Now, for generations, this incredibly harsh environment offered locals little more than fish and some really punishing storms. But buried deep beneath the seabed lay a secret that was about to fundamentally alter the destiny of an entire nation. Today, in this explainer, we're diving into the cinematic, almost unbelievable story of how Norway managed an unprecedented influx of sudden wealth. We're going to look at how they completely avoided the massive pitfalls that have destroyed other resource-rich nations and somehow managed to secure their financial future for generations to come. So, let's jump right in.
Here is the fundamental question we have to ask. What happens when a country literally wins the geographical lottery? I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow and just discovering unimaginable wealth right in your own backyard. That temptation is totally universal, right? Do you go out and spend it all immediately on cars, houses, and luxury vacations? Or do you exercise delayed gratification, lock the money away, and just live off the interest? Now, for a single person, that choice is hard enough, but for an entire nation of millions, driven by short-term political election cycles and very real immediate needs, choosing delayed gratification is almost impossible. And yet, as we'll see, that is exactly the path this one nation chose to walk. And that path began with a single, earth-shattering event.
Part 1. The Ekofisk oil discovery.
So, when Phillips Petroleum finally struck oil in 1969, Norway didn't just strike it rich, they actually stepped right into a trap. Economists have a name for this. They call it the resource curse, or Dutch disease. It's basically an economic phenomenon where a sudden massive resource boom floods a country with cash. And sure, that sounds great on paper, right? But in reality, it artificially inflates the currency, completely kills off other domestic industries like manufacturing or agriculture, and very often breeds massive political corruption. The initial boom almost always creates a devastating bust. For a lot of nations, sudden oil wealth is an absolute curse rather than a blessing.
So the truly crucial thing here is exactly how Norway reacted, which just goes to show the incredible speed of their political consensus. The Ekofisk field was discovered in late 1969. By 1971, Norwegian politicians had reached across party lines to adopt a completely unified framework. And by 1972, they had established State Oil, their state oil company, as well as a dedicated petroleum directorate. They moved with lightning speed to build a protective wall around their economy before that flood of oil money could wash their traditional industries away. And that wall was built on a very specific set of rules. Let's take a look at the actual blueprint of Norway's success.
Part 2. The 10 Oil Commandments.
In 1971, a parliamentary committee got together and drew up the 10 Oil Commandments. These were the strict, non-negotiable rules for anyone who wanted to drill in Norwegian waters. They demanded strict national supervision and control over all operations. They mandated the creation of a state oil company to handle all commercial interests, and, in a move that was incredibly forward-thinking for the early 1970s, they actually prohibited gas flaring to protect the environment. They also required the petroleum to be landed directly in Norway to help build up new domestic industries. From day one, they made absolutely sure that foreign companies wouldn't just extract the wealth and leave. The wealth had to serve the entire society.
This whole approach was just deeply, deeply rooted in their culture. I absolutely love this quote from a 2004 Slate article. It says, "Norway has pursued a classically Scandinavian solution, a thick, goose-down cushion for the distant day when the oil wells run dry. It so beautifully captures their mindset. They didn't view the oil as income to be spent right away. No, they viewed it as a temporary, collectively owned windfall. It was essentially an asset exchange, taking a finite geological resource and turning it into a permanent financial one. But practically speaking, how do you actually store billions of dollars without destroying your own economy? Well, let's get into the climax of this explainer.
Part 3. Building the Global Fund.
To manage these vast, overwhelming revenues, the Parliament passed legislation in 1990 to create the Government Pension Fund Global, or GPFG. The first actual deposit was made a bit later, in 1996. And here is the absolute genius mechanism behind this fund. 100% of it is invested outside of Norway. By strictly forbidding the fund from investing in local Norwegian assets or the domestic currency, they basically built a massive financial shock absorber. The money was kept entirely offshore in global markets, which prevented their own currency from overheating and successfully shielded traditional Norwegian exporters from that dreaded Dutch disease we talked about.
The scale of what they have built since then is almost difficult to comprehend. By the end of 2025, the fund sits at over 21 trillion Norwegian kroner. That is over $2 trillion US dollars. It is officially the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. To put that massive number into perspective, this single fund owns roughly 1.5% of all the listed companies in the entire world. They essentially own a tiny slice of almost every major corporation on the planet.
Let's try to humanize that staggering amount of data for a second. If you took that $2 trillion and divided it equally, it equates to roughly $390,000 for every single registered citizen in Norway. So from a newborn baby taking their first breath to an elderly pensioner, that is their theoretical personal share of the national wealth. It's wild.
So how is all this money actually invested? Well, in 2025, they are heavily weighted toward equities, sitting at 71.3%. That's followed by fixed income at 26.5%, along with some smaller slices in unlisted real estate and renewable infrastructure. And you know what? This strategy is working beautifully. In 2025, they generated a massive 15.1% return. That huge growth was largely driven by really solid corporate earnings globally, combined with some intense optimism around artificial intelligence in the equity markets. So, okay, they have all this money. How do they actually spend it without running out? Let's check out the mathematical engine driving this perpetual wealth.
Part 4. The 3% rule, or as they call it, handlingsregelen.
Look, it's pretty simple math. If you spend the principal, the actual raw oil revenue, you deplete the fund over time. You get a massive boom, and then an absolutely inevitable bust when the oil finally runs dry. But under the fiscal rule, Norway agreed to only spend the expected real return of their investments. So all the tax revenue from oil goes directly into the fund, and only the interest is pulled out to balance the national budget. The principal itself remains completely untouched, just sitting there, compounding forever.
And what's truly fascinating is that they eventually tighten their own belts even further. Originally, this rule allowed them to spend 4% a year, but in 2017, a group called the Thorgerson Commission recommended lowering that cap to just 3%. Why? Because in a modern world of lower interest rates, they wanted to be absolutely 100% certain they weren't slowly eating into the core capital. Think about that level of political self-restraint for a second. The politicians willingly voted to give themselves less money to spend today just to guarantee that the math favors the future.
Naturally, to manage this growing, highly complex global portfolio efficiently, Norges Bank Investment Management relies heavily on some cutting-edge tech. Under the leadership of CEO Nikolai Tangen, all 680 employees now use artificial intelligence every single day. And this isn't just a fun corporate buzzword for them. By extensively using AI for coding, data analysis, and processing, they've achieved a reported 20% productivity gain. They actually reduced trading costs by a staggering 4.8 billion kroner between 2023 and 2025 alone. But look, managing $2 trillion isn't just an exercise in clever math and AI. It carries a massive moral responsibility. So how is this immense financial gravity wielding?
Part 5. Investing with a conscience.
Since 2004, the fund has operated under a set of strict, forward-looking ethical guidelines, which are actually dictated by the Norwegian Parliament. These break down into two main areas. First up, product criteria. The fund absolutely will not invest in companies that produce tobacco, cannabis, thermal coal, or certain types of weapons like cluster munitions or nuclear arms. Period. Second, conduct criteria. They will exclude companies, no matter how ridiculously profitable they might be, if those companies are responsible for severe environmental damage, human rights violations, or gross corruption.
Now, to ensure this isn't just based on arbitrary political whims, they use a highly structured, objective two-tier process. Step 1 involves an entirely independent council on ethics. They assess corporate behavior globally and issue specific recommendations. Step 2 is where the executive board of the central bank receives those recommendations and makes the final, binding decision to either place a company under observation or just exclude them from the investment universe entirely.
And they apply these rules with clinical enforcement. Based on the sources we're examining, this process really does seem to operate independently of short-term political pressure. When the ethical lines are crossed, the fund acts. They've divested from massive global players. For instance, they excluded companies directly linked to forced labor in the Xinjiang internment camps. They've divested from defense contractors producing controversial weapons. Recently, they even divested from Caterpillar and other entities, citing ethical guidelines regarding operations in conflict zones. Now, we aren't taking a stance on any of these complex geopolitical issues in this explainer, but rather neutrally pointing out that the fund systematically enforces its rulebook, without hesitation across the board.
Ultimately, all of this,
The ethical investing, the 3% rule, the AI optimization, those original 10 commandments, it all leads back to one core philosophy. The Ministry of Finance and the central bank, they're just the managers. The true owners of this $2 trillion wealth are the Norwegian people. And importantly, that includes all the generations of Norwegians who haven't even been born yet.
The Norwegian model is, at its heart, a story of unprecedented long-term vision. They successfully took a finite, dirty, geological asset bubbling up from beneath the North Sea, and they converted it into a permanent, multi-trillion-dollar financial legacy. They chose that thick, goose-down cushion over an immediate, fleeting spending spree.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. It's super easy to look at Norway today and praise their success in hindsight. But getting there required incredible discipline, massive political consensus, and a huge amount of trust in their institutions. So ask yourself this. If your country suddenly discovered a multi-trillion-dollar windfall tomorrow, could your political system pass this ultimate test of delayed gratification? It's a pretty fascinating question to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.